Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Buenos dias, damas y caballeros. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sung-Hoon Kim, and I'll be your MC for this event. I'd like to welcome you to ICAO's 40th Assembly SkyTalks. Over the next 2 weeks, we have 68 presentations for you. This is day 2, session number 5. Now, in order to view the previous SkyTalks, please make sure to go to the ICAO channel on YouTube. We are coming to you live. I'd like to make sure that you put your phones on vibrating mode. And following the presentation, should you have any questions, please feel free to step up to the mic and ask them. As all of you are well aware, air navigation is the safest form of travel. But what to do when incidents occur? What are the systems, the processes to help you deal with this? To tell you more about the global aeronautical distress and safety systems, implementation support tools, we have Ian Knowles, Technical Officer at Operations Safety Section, to provide you with more information. Without further ado, Mr. Ian Knowles.
So thank you and welcome everyone. So yeah, my name's Ian Knowles. I'm a Technical Officer with the Operational Safety Section here at ICAO. And I will be spending the next 20 minutes or so talking to you about the GADSS, Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, implementation support tools, that's Ops Control and LADR. If you're not familiar with what Ops Control or LADR is, or even if you're not terribly familiar with what the GADSS is, hopefully the next 20 minutes will help solve some of those questions for you. So I'm going to start by putting in a little bit of context around what the implementation support tools are for. So I'm going to take you right back to the concept for the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, and that's probably the last time I'm going to say the whole thing out loud, so GADSS. So the overall concept is described in the Concept of Operations, the GADSS Concept of Operations, version 6. It's a fairly mature document. This document actually is available on the ICAO public website. If you haven't seen it and you're interested, it's available for download on the global flight tracking pages of ICAO.in, so I'd recommend you go and get a copy. Within the GADSS concept itself, we have basically 3 broad areas. So we have aircraft tracking. If you were paying attention from the beginning of the GADSS concept, you probably remember this as being normal aircraft tracking, but nowadays we just refer to it as aircraft tracking. We have autonomous distress tracking, and then finally we have post-flight localization and recovery. So looking at those 3 areas then, for the aircraft tracking, that's the area that we're developing the ops control system to support the implementation. And again, as we get through the presentation, I'll start to explain a little bit about how that fits in with the aircraft tracking idea. For autonomous distress tracking, this is where the LADR fits in. And again, a little bit later in the presentation, we'll be going through what distress tracking is and how LADR can help. Post-flight location and recovery, we're not going to be covering in this talk. That's a different subject. So I'd just like to give a little bit more context about what we've actually done in terms of the implementation of the GADSS. The concept of operation sets out the high-level objectives, and it was the original intent of how the whole system was supposed to work from start to finish. What we actually have is a series of standards which have been implemented predominantly in Annex 6, the operation of aircraft, Part 1 for commercial air transport. So for aircraft tracking, that's Annex 6, Part 1, Section 3.5. For the location of an aircraft in distress, this is the autonomous distress tracking part, that's Section 618. And for the post-flight data recovery, that's in Section 6.3.5. As I've already mentioned, we're not going to be looking at that section. This talk really focuses on both aircraft tracking and the location of an aircraft in distress. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of aircraft tracking. Apologies if you are very familiar with this subject. It might start a little basic, but I just want to make sure that we understand what the context is for the support tools and why we're intending to put them in place and what they can help us do. So aircraft tracking then, the basic requirement, it's for, essentially it's a 15-minute automated position report from an aircraft. So the idea is that when this was originally brought in using in the GADSS concept, it would be using existing aircraft technology. It wasn't supposed to be something that you'd have to go out and build a new box for. It's something that you could be using on the aircraft today. And typically what we're finding is that this is fulfilled by the use of ADS-C. The requirement is that what we really want to do is make sure that we're getting that 15-minute position report, or at least a report at most every 15 minutes. And so it's gone into Annex 6 Part 1 as an operator requirement. The operator has a responsibility to ensure that they're getting that position report from the aircraft. Now, there is a caveat, and the caveat is that if the aircraft is operating through an airspace where we know for sure that the air navigation service provider is already getting position reports at less than 15 minutes, then the operator is relieved of their responsibility to track. So really, you can see that the idea is to make sure that someone somewhere knows where this aircraft is at least every 15 minutes. If ANSPs are not doing it, it's an operator function, and if they are doing it, then the operator is relieved. Although, of course, they can still choose to track their aircraft and get that 15-minute position report. There's no reason not to. Again, the idea behind that was that it would use existing aircraft technology, and so that was implemented into Annex 6 with an applicability date of November 2018. So this is actually applicable today. In terms of the applicability of the standard, well, it's a requirement that the operator has to get that 15-minute position report when the aircraft is in oceanic airspace. What do we mean by oceanic airspace? Really, it's everywhere that's airspace overlying the territory outside of the territorial waters of a state. So it's pretty much beyond 12 nautical miles from the boundary of the state, anywhere that would be considered to be over water, really. Everywhere else, it's not a requirement, but it is still a recommendation. So we do actually recommend, and in fact the guidance that was written to support this recommends, that operators continue to track their aircraft throughout the entire area of operations. But the fundamental requirement where it has to happen is over oceanic airspace. Now, I mentioned before that there was a caveat in that standard that said it's an operator function, it's Annex 6 Part 1, and therefore it's down to the operator to do it, but there is an exception where we know that the airspace already has a requirement to get that position report. And so this is one of the, it's not actually part of the tool, but it's one of the support tools that is already available, again, through the ICAO public website, Global Flight Tracking. And this map shows all the flight information regions in the world, and they're color-coded to let you know what's happening in terms of the aircraft tracking responsibility. So where the FIRs are colored in green, that means we know we've received information from the ANSP who's managing that airspace, sometimes on our behalf if it's oceanic. We know that there is an ADSC system in place that provides position reporting at 15-minute intervals or less. And typically that's normally a 14-minute interval for separation requirements. So everywhere on that map that you see is green. If you're operating an aircraft with ADSC, you can be comfortable knowing that the ANSP is actually getting those position reports. And in fact, in that airspace, the requirement to track is alleviated for the operator, although again, as we say, the recommendation is still there that you should continue to do that. Areas on the map that are coloured in orange, you can see one there now, those are the areas where we know for a fact that there is no such reporting. So operating through that airspace, the operator definitely has a requirement to track their aircraft and get that position information every 15 minutes because we know that the ANSP is not doing it. You might well ask, I'm sure you're all thinking, what about the blue areas? Well, the simple fact is we don't know. The information that's shown on this map is a result of a survey which ICAO sent out on a state letter last year. And all the information that we've had has been collected and displayed on this map for operators to use and states to use. Unfortunately, we haven't quite got all that information back yet. We're still looking for some of the details on some of these FIRs to know whether or not we can be sure that the ANSP has that 15-minute reporting or less. Just as a kind of by thought, if anyone is in the audience right now and thinking, hey, that's my FIR up there, come and talk to me afterwards. We'd love to get your information and put it on that map. That would be great, thanks. So that's the tracking area responsibility. So having established this requirement for operators to track their aircraft and having them receiving these 15-minute reports, the question is, what happens if they don't come in? What happens if you, as an operator, have an aircraft, it's tracking through oceanic airspace, and you're expecting a position report, and for some reason that report doesn't come in? Well, again, the guidance that was written for aircraft tracking suggests that you should have a procedure of actually looking at that and dealing with it. And in fact, a little bit later in the presentation, we'll come on to some provisions that are being drafted to recommend that operators have this in place. But the question is, what do I do with this 15-minute report when it fails to come in? It's telling me something. It's telling me my aircraft is no longer reporting its position. So I should probably find out what's happening. And in fact, the process that we recommend is that the operator tries to establish contact with their aircraft, tries to find out if there's anything happening, and if there is reason to doubt the safety of the aircraft, then they should initiate the existing process, which we already have in Annex 6 and Annex 11, contact the ANSP and to follow up on that. So here's the guidance that we wrote for aircraft tracking. It's Circular 347. In the back of that guidance material, we have a missed position report form, and it has two sections, basically. The top section is really the required essential information that would always get filled in. That has things like the flight number and the call sign, the last known position of the aircraft, and it's really all the kind of stuff that an ANSP would definitely need in order to be able to identify what the aircraft is that's in their airspace, that's potentially in distress, or there is something happening. Second half of that form, well, that's supplemental information. It's great if you can put it down. Maybe it would get done on a follow-up report. Maybe it would get done if there was extra time or if it was possible. And it contains things like the colour and distinctive markings of an aircraft, for example, which are useful if we move ahead into a search and rescue scenario, but might not be the first thing that you'd want to send to an ASP if you're having trouble contacting your aircraft. So as an operator, I'm tracking my airplanes. I realised I've got a 15-minute position report which failed to arrive. Tried to contact the aircraft, nothing's happening. I filled in this report form. Next question, where does it go? Bearing in mind some of our operators could have an area of operations that's basically global. So this aircraft could be anywhere in the world. It could be the other side of the world right now, and I need to know who to contact, which ANSP is responsible, how do I get hold of them, how do I make sure I can actually talk to someone who understands what's happening in their airspace. How do I know where to send this information, in fact? Well, this is really where the Ops Control database comes in. The point of the Ops Control database is to establish operational contact information for both the air navigation service providers and the operators to make sure that if there is any doubt about the safety of the aircraft, those two parties can talk to each other and they can find an actual point of contact that's available pretty much always 24/7, but it's I want to be clear, it's an operational point of contact. It's not an office position or a manager. It's someone who's dealing in the Ops Control Centre or the ACC for the ANSP. In terms of the access, we're aware that the information here is a little bit sensitive, and so for air navigation service providers, what we're intending is they would have access to everything. At the moment, the Ops Control database contains ANSP contact information and operator contact information. If you're an ASP, we don't see any reason why you shouldn't contact other ANSPs or indeed have access to any operator contact details that you might need. For operators, that information is a little bit more restrictive. They only have access to the ANSP contact data. There's no real reason we can think of that an operator would need to have the operational contacts of another airline. And so we restrict that information to what they would need, which is the ANSP data. If they're trying to get hold of someone to ask about the state of their aircraft, that would be an ANSP. So that's how the information is controlled. So I'm going to have a quick look through what the Ops Control database looks like. It's not a live demo. The system is currently live. It is available for people to register and use, and the information in it is operational contact information. So rather than giving you a live demo, which would necessitate me having a keyboard and various other things up here, I'll just run through some screenshots of what it looks like. But I would like to stress it is live and the information in it is correct and valid. So here is the front page for the Ops Control Directory. You'll notice it's a little small to see, but you'll be able to see at the top two tabs there that I've got access to flight information regions and operators. That means I've signed in as if I was an ANSP because I'm allowed to search for both the ANSP data and the operator data. So if we start searching then, and you type into that box, it's going to bring up a drop-down list of matches to your search. It's possible to search by FIR name, and it's also possible to search by four-letter location indicator, either of which will bring you up with the right information. So I've looked up Shannick Oceanic, and here it is. It's a little small, so I'll bring it up in a slightly higher size for you. As I say, this is a live database, and that's actually the contact information of the ops supervisor in Shannick. So for obvious reasons, I didn't decide to show you what that phone number is. Please don't call Shannick. They don't want to hear from you. But there it is. That's the current information. Where we get it, we'll provide an operational phone number, direct line call to the ops supervisor. It's an email address, AFTN address. Anything we get from those ANSPs and those operators, we put it into the Ops Control database, and it's available for the people who need it. In terms of the availability, you'll see here it's 24/7. If we know that the hours of the operation of either the Area Control Center or the Operator's Ops Control Center are different, they will be published here as well, so that you'll know if you're trying to contact them whether they're actually available at that time. So that's an example of an ANSP. If I go then, just before I leave that, you'll have seen from the from the map before, where we were trying to color code it to show the areas where surveillance was available from the ANSPs, that not all of those areas are colored in. That means we don't have information from all of the FIRs. So here I did a search for Johannesburg. The database knows that Johannesburg Oceanic exists as an FIR. Unfortunately, we don't have contact details for them because they're one of the ones that we're still waiting to receive that. So again, if you're in the room, if you have that information, please get in touch. We'd love to put that in and make that database complete for the operators that need it. So moving on then, this is an example now. I've switched over to search for an operator. And again, I can search either by three-letter designator or by the name. It will bring up a list of suggestions. And here it brings up Qatar Airways, and you can see their senior manager for the IOC. And again, it's a direct line phone number, it's a direct email address, and it's available 24/7. If I, as an ASP, need to find someone in Qatar to talk to, that's their ops control center. It's not a manager. It's not someone who won't be able to respond to me until Monday morning. It's a 24/7 operational contact. I can phone him up and say, where's your airplane? It's gone. So this is the point of the ops control. It puts the operators and the ANSPs in touch directly around the world, so that if there's any doubt as to the safety of an airplane, we facilitate them getting in touch and talking to each other. The ops control itself, when I go in as a user, I have the option to set up various functions. We tried to make it for ANSPs that it's sufficiently flexible. So, for example, a single area control center with multiple FIRs, one FIR with multiple area control centers, or all kinds of variety in between. So it's reasonably customizable. It should be able to accommodate most options. I can go in as a user, I can go in and edit that contact information. And in fact, as a user, as I sign in from time to time, a message will come up telling me that I haven't updated or verified my contact information recently to make sure that I keep it up to date. One user within each organization has the authority to grant other people access. There's only ever one person that has access to edit the contact information, but other people in the organization can see it. So other people can sign in and get that contact information they need to contact the ANSP or the operator, depending on how it works. So that's the ops control database. In order to make this functionality really kind of work properly, there's a couple of additional provisions that we feel are necessary. They're being proposed right now for PANS Ops Volume 3. One of those is for an operator to have a requirement to monitor their tracking systems. So we know that they're getting this information. They have 15-minute position reports coming in. It would be great if they actually use that information in a timely manner to act on it and contact an ANSP if they had to. And so the other action is to make sure that they take sufficient action in the event that they have any kind of questions about the safety of the aircraft. So those provisions are being put into PANS Ops Volume 3, or proposed to PANS Ops Volume 3. That will be going out on a state letter very shortly. So moving on then to location of an aircraft in distress. So if we're going to talk about an aircraft in distress, we need a distress scenario. So I've created one for you here. Firstly, what is an aircraft in distress? Well, we say that an aircraft is in a distress condition when it's in a situation or in a state that, if uncorrected, would lead to an accident. So there's a number of broad categories that would fit this requirement. For example, a very unusual attitude, an unusual airspeed for the flight phase, close proximity to terrain, or in this case, a loss of thrust on all engines. So here we have a distress condition. This aircraft is in distress, and the standards in 618 say that the requirement is whenever the aircraft is in distress, the distress tracking system on board the aircraft must transmit information from which the position of the aircraft can be determined at least once every minute. Okay, so that's the basic requirement. There is also a requirement within the standard that the operator must get a notification that their aircraft is in distress. Now, I want to clear up some misconceptions that we often get at this point. This is a notification to an operator that something might be happening on their aircraft. At this stage, this is not an alert that would result in an action by search and rescue to look for a downed aircraft. We have a situation, an automatic trigger or even a manual trigger, as we'll see later, indicating the aircraft might be in a distress condition. And so definitely we want the operator to follow up on this. We want them to verify. We want them to contact the ANSP and, if necessary, get that alert raised as soon as possible. But this is not the alert. This is the notification to the operator to follow up on that action. So once the operator has got that information, they're getting this 1 minute position report now from their aircraft in a distress condition. The standards in Annex 6 also say that it's their responsibility to make sure that information is available to anyone that needs it. And it's a little clearer than that in that it specifically calls out the air traffic service units that might require it. It calls out the rescue coordination centres who might be able to might be involved in a search if this does turn into an accident. It also specifies that the state of the operator can define anyone else that they feel would need to have this position information. Now that could be, for example, Accident Investigation Board. Maybe they decide the Ministry of Transport wants access. It's whoever they think really has a need to have that location information must get it from the operator. Now this is a bit of a challenge for operators. We saw before that they had potentially an area of operations that was global and they had to send this information out to air traffic service units or rescue coordination centres and other people defined by the state, which they may not even be aware of. So really this is where the second tool comes in. This is where the location of an aircraft in distress repository is intended to help, the LADR. The LADR, the LADR, sits in the middle, and now what we have is a requirement for the operator to provide their information to a central repository, and that's it. As far as we're concerned, as far as Annex 6 is concerned, this meets their requirement, because now the air traffic service unit can go to that repository and find that information when they want it. The rescue coordination centres can find it in the same repository. Anyone else that the state of the operator wants to have access to that information just needs to be given an account to access the repository. And so now we're meeting this Annex 6 requirement that says the operator has to get this information out to various entities around the world by having it put into a central repository. And in fact, hopefully it's even easier than that, because what's going to happen is the service provider for the autonomous distress tracking system will have that connection already to the repository. Quick run through the timelines then. Back in February 2019, we started scoping this. Again, if you were paying attention back then, it used to be called the Distress Tracking Repository. We changed the name for various reasons. Come and talk to me afterwards if you don't like it. We had a couple of workshops, one in April, one in July, which are all about scoping out both the functionality and the system architecture for the workshop, for the repository, to make sure that it did what we thought it should do and that it functioned in a way that was able to be built and constructed and robust. That then moved into a procurement process, and the procurement process is pretty much about to go live now. So ICAO is currently tendering for outside organisations to build for us the location of an aircraft in distress repository. We're expecting a prototype to be available around about February 2020, and then we'll be able to use that prototype to do a tabletop exercise validation to make sure it meets our requirements, hopefully around March 2020, with a view to bringing that in. This is the provisions I was talking about earlier for November, which is the requirements for the operator to have that functionality to monitor. Having the actual LADR system up and running for December 2020, which is just in time for the applicability 1st of January 2021 for the ADT. Quick summary for those who missed it earlier, but also very quick. In terms of funding, well, we're aware that someone needs to pay for this, so we have actually sent out a state letter requesting funding. We're asking for contributions to the ICAO Safe Fund to fund the development of the repository. There's a basic functionality that it needs to have. It needs to be able to store data and have access to that data from other users. During the functional workshop, there were additional functions that are identified that might be worth having. And so if we get more contributions, we're able to develop a bigger system maybe later on, then that system can grow and expand to take in that additional functionality. In terms of the additional provisions, just like with the aircraft tracking, we have some requirements going into PANZOPS Volume 3, the first of which obviously is for an operator to put that information in the repository. If we build a central repository, everyone has access to it, then we really need that information from the ADT to go into the system so it's available. We also want to make sure that the operators have a system of monitoring that data so that as soon as they get that notification that there's an issue with an aircraft, they actually take action and they do something about it. And again, acting on that information is another requirement. Verification of the distress event or contacting, if there's any doubts to the safety of the aircraft, having that contact with the ANSP to establish and get the alert phase active as soon as possible. One final point, we do have in the Annex 6 standards a requirement that the ADT system has to have a manual activation function, and so also going into PANZOPS Volume 3 will be a discussion of how that was going to work. We think at this stage it's probably going to be a requirement for the operator to have their own process to determine when they think it's applicable to use the manual activation function, and to make sure that crews are aware that it exists and they've been trained on it. Again, manual activation, as for automatic activation, it's a 1-minute position report, and again, that information will go direct to the repository and be available for anyone who needs it. So that's pretty much everything. Thanks for listening. I hope you understand a little bit more about GADSS, Ops Control and LADR, and happy to take any questions.
If you have any questions, please step up to the mic. Okay. Thank you, Knowles.